Somewhere in an old photo album or file folder is a picture of my dad with Don McKinnon at the laying of the cornerstone for the new junior high wing at Assiniboine School in 1968. Dad was president of the Home and School Association, while Don was the principal of the school. Our home backed onto the school grounds, and in addition to his work at the Home and School Association, as well as his volunteer leadership in the Boy Scouts, Dad engaged in a guerrilla operation to plant trees around the perimeter of the grounds, which led to a commendation from the St. James Assiniboia School Division when they discovered who was behind the clandestine landscaping. Only Don and Dad knew. They circumvented the policies in place to govern such matters, and week by week, month by month, year by year, new trees kept popping up in the school grounds. The caretakers were less enthusiastic than the school board, however, since they had to mow around Dad's improvements. Lawn mowers, the people, don't like trees. Sadly, most of those trees are now gone, so I've sometimes felt like I should sneak onto the grounds under the cover of darkness to plant new ones. Looking back, however, I think it was this kind of activity on Dad's part that instilled in me the sense that we are called to volunteer our efforts to enhance the quality of life for everyone in the communities where we live. I don't think my father thought of his efforts as giving back, so much as he thought of them as investing in the well-being of the community and the proper stewardship of nature. It was the kind of thing that good citizens do. He volunteered both through community organizations and often on his own initiative. The theologian James Luther Adams maintained that the voluntary association is the distinctive and indispensable institution of democratic society. Such free and voluntary associations presuppose freedom on the part of the individual to be or not to be a member, to join or withdraw, to consort with others to form a new association. And they stand in contrast to the involuntary associations that exist, including the state and our families. And one might add those institutions established through legislation and contracts that fall short of being voluntary in nature, including religious institutions in those countries where a state religion prevails. Many important institutions in a democratic society fall somewhere in between the voluntary association and the involuntary entity, such as business corporations and educational institutions, not to mention professional associations and trade unions in those situations where membership in them is obligatory in order to maintain one's employment. When I think of the wide array of voluntary associations, religious institutions come immediately to mind, as do social clubs and service agencies, philanthropic institutions, and political movements, although the latter sometimes seem more self-serving than community-serving at times. These are the kind of institutions in a free society where we may join or withdraw on our own initiative, or at least with a minimum of social pressure. And these institutions tend to be voluntary in a double sense of the word. That is, they are voluntary in that we are free to join or not, but also voluntary in the sense that they depend largely on voluntary financial support and volunteer staffing to accomplish their organizational missions, whatever they may be. The principle of voluntarism is central to their very nature. Yes, such entities often employ staff, but without the support of volunteers, they would soon cease to exist. And when you stop to think of it, some of the most important work in our society is done on a volunteer basis. From political campaigns to charitable fundraising, churches to community clubs, athletics to cultural activities, museums to social services, we are dependent on large corps of volunteers to make things happen. Service is the rent that you pay for room on this earth, asserted Shirley Chisholm. I grew up in a family where volunteering was expected, although this was before the days when public schools sought to mandate volunteering as a requirement to advance from one grade to the next. Something that may actually undermine the spirit of volunteering while encouraging young people to develop their capacities of exaggeration, if not outright lying, in order to attain academic credit for sometimes imaginary activities and contributions. Please excuse my cynicism, but mandatory volunteering used to be something that was limited to the military. For nearly as long as I can remember, I've been an active volunteer. I suppose my volunteering began in earnest when I was an 8-year-old Cub Scout, something I was never very good at, when we were encouraged to do our best, dib, 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 dob, 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 by helping out with whatever activities demanded our time and effort. When I was 11, I participated in my first political campaign, something of a gateway drug that proved to be addictive. And I don't think I've actually sat out an entire election campaign since then, federal, provincial, or municipal. Although the intensity of my participation has fluctuated dependent on the amount of time I had available and my interest in the issues. In junior high school, I served on the student council and yearbook committee. In high school, I was involved in the student newspaper and in organizing a variety of social events. Then, as a young adult, my volunteering shifted dramatically in the direction of church work, long before I ever imagined that I might become an ordained minister. And I marvel at the positions of responsibility that this church entrusted to me. Positions that no other community organization, let alone an employer, would have given me. I think back to when this congregation took a chance on me to edit the communicator when I was just 21, or naming me to the district board where I served as district treasurer when I was 22, or appointing me as a lay chaplain when I was 23, or allowing me to serve as the district president when I was 24. You see a pattern here. Like many other young people, the church afforded me an opportunity to make mistakes that would be forgiven as I grew into increasing levels of responsibility. And it offered plenty of mentors along the way. You see, volunteering isn't a one-way street, but rather an opportunity to grow within the context of a supportive community. This community has been that for many individuals during its history, and especially for young people who are seeking to develop their gifts, and especially for older people who are so often pushed aside following their retirement. Churches offer opportunities to remain active and engaged, doing meaningful work on behalf of some greater good. After I was ordained to the ministry, and indeed even before I was ordained, I resolved to always maintain at least one significant volunteer commitment. That is, a volunteer activity that was not directly related to ministry, on the grounds that ministers lead by influence and example, not by virtue of their ordination or office. How could I expect members of congregations to give generously of their time if I didn't do so myself? And so, notwithstanding the fact that it is not required in our tradition, I have always tithed my income and my time to various organizations. So I served on the editorial board of a cultural magazine, more than one in fact, volunteered for ethnic organizations, served as a tour guide, pitched in at my daughter's schools and in a variety of community initiatives, joined the alumni council of my alma mater, and eventually accepted an appointment to the university's Board of Regents, which in recent months almost became a full-time unpaid job for me. While I'm a little uncomfortable reciting this list of activities, I do so for the purpose of observing that volunteer commitment, volunteering for the greater good, has been a lifelong commitment for me, while acknowledging that the rewards have almost always exceeded the demands. Volunteering is good for you, like a glass of freshly squeezed juice or a drink of milk, like, well, a salad with vegetables in it and not just bacon. Volunteering is good for the body, good for the soul, good for our emotions. My life has been enriched by it. And I believe that is true for an overwhelming majority of those who offer volunteer service to the institutions and causes they love. Indeed, I think that many people look back on their lives and discover that it is their volunteer efforts that have given them the greatest satisfaction, far beyond the things that they did because they were obliged to earn a living or obliged to do something for others. Perhaps you've never thought of yourself as a costly piece of working capital, as Albert Schweitzer put it. But those who volunteer, wherever they give of their time and talent, are indeed the working capital that churches and nonprofit organizations depend upon to realize their mission. Over the years, I have invested more time as a volunteer than I invested in completing my university education. I would imagine that many, if not most of you, could say the same. In the course of a lifetime, many of us contribute more to the world through our volunteer activities than we do through our paid employment. The most valuable work does not always have a price attached to it. Search, then, for some investment for your humanity, and do not be frightened away if you have to wait or be taken on trial. And be prepared for disappointments, admonished Schweitzer. We sing, gather the Spirit, harvest the power, our separate fires will kindle one flame. There's another one of those Freudian slips. It's a promise that singer-songwriter Jim Scott makes in the words of our gathering hymn. It is only when we explore the nature of the power we have and where it comes from that we are able to harvest our power and put it to use. It seems to me that the harvest we seek for the good of this community and the betterment of the world is intimated in our congregational affirmation, which asserts that service is our law, or its prayer in some versions. It is nothing short of a call to volunteerism. It then falls upon us as individuals to discern where and how we are called to serve. In Corinthians, Paul asserted that there were varieties of gifts and varieties of activities, each of which could be seen as a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. I've left out a lot of what he said in the interests of your comfort. He went on to enumerate a few of the spiritual gifts to be found, most of them rather quaint in modern terms, but his understanding that everyone has certain gifts, that none have them all, and that collectively we have all the gifts we need for the common good is unassailable. Today, we might say that some have gifts of leading in worship, others in teaching, some in music, others in the visual arts, some in leadership, others in administration, some in outreach, others in pastoral care. I could go on, but you get the essential point. Think of just this morning, where several people knew what to do in a difficult moment, where people with particular skills, particular understanding, and a particular awareness knew how to step into the moment to deal with a difficult circumstance so that a beloved member of this community would be cared for. We had a living illustration of the impact of a variety of gifts coming into play in order to serve a greater good. Each of us has our own capacities for service, and each of us must discern the best ways for us to use those capacities. In doing so, we can harvest the collective power of this community. And by serving in the ways we can, we acquire and develop new capacities that can lead in time to our serving in ways that we never even imagined to be possible. In a world where many glibly and too often cynically offer thoughts and prayers in response to crises and disasters, we need more people who pray through active service, not only in response to the world's great needs, but in response to its everyday needs, not only in faraway places, but also close to home. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish humble tasks as though they were great and noble, said Helen Keller. The world is moved along not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker. The artisans who worked on the great cathedrals knew they were contributing to something much larger than themselves, something that would outlive them. I think that somewhere deep inside all of us, we long to do something that will last beyond our days, that will make a difference beyond our limited capacities, that will prove, when all is said and done, to have been worth our living. And more often than not, we are unaware of the profound differences that we are already making in the lives of our companions. We often have little way of knowing that the word we offered, the casserole we baked, the visit we made, the mess we cleaned up, or the child we gave our attention to mattered far more than we might have imagined in the moment. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve, insisted Albert Schweitzer. I have discovered in my own efforts to serve, it has often been my unusual and even obscure interests that have proven to be of the greatest value to the community. The very interests I've sometimes thought of to be little understood and even less valued, but which reflected abilities only I could bring in certain circumstances, and even then only in certain places and particular points in time. I have also learned, as in the words of the Anglican prayer book, something you may only hear me mention from this pulpit once. In the Anglican prayer book, where it says, even those serve who stand and wait. Sometimes that's what we're called to do in the moment. We sometimes joke about our superpowers, but in real life, superpowers are nothing more than everyday abilities in the right place at the right time. We bring in the harvest when the crop is ready and the necessary tools are at hand. But unlike the farmer's field, there is almost always a harvest to be made within a spiritual community. And the tools are almost always available if people recognize them and offer them, both the ones they possess and the ones they see in others. I want to be with people who are submerged in the task, declared poet Marge Piercy, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. Today is as good a day as any to harvest the power of our rich living tradition and this community of seekers and friends. Please join in singing our closing hymn, number 1028, in the Teal hymn book, The Fire of Commitment.